Hello, everyone. I'm Samson Young. I'm an artist and a composer, and I'm very happy to be with you virtually and sharing with you some of my works um, in the past. Some of these works are also going to be shown in an exhibition that is at MUMA. Some other works that I'll be talking about they are older pieces and they contextualize my practice. Um, so I think I'll just launch right into it um, and and start um, telling you a little bit more about how I work um, and my background. So I was trained as a musician and a composer originally. Um, I actually went to school in Australia um, as a high school student and also an undergraduate student at the music department at the University of Sydney. And then after that, I went and did some graduate studies in the US. But I have since that time my practice have morphed from a more purely musical sort of practice, very strict down the center composer kind of way of making, to now where I make a whole range of different kinds of things, from video to installations and drawings and music theater. Um, and um, it's not sort of easy to um, find like a common thread between all of the different works that I do, because they actually look and sound really different from, you know, going from one work to another. There's often a very um, there's often a significant stylistic shift even from one work to the other. But I think roughly speaking, I have gone through several phrases, and I tend to work on one topic for um, for a couple of years before I shift my attention to another topic of research. So hopefully that is going to help anchor uh, my introduction somewhat, help you navigate through the many different things that I do. So uh, yet still a little bit more about my background first, maybe. After finishing my undergraduate studies in composition, um, I met I went back to Hong Kong for a few years um, before going to the US for graduate studies. And when I was back in Hong Kong, I met a group of new media artists. Um, and they really opened up my thinking in terms of working outside of music, which is the world that I knew, and what was possible outside of this world. And so uh, during those 2 years in Hong Kong, I was a part of an artist collective with a video artist and a poet. and the three of us would make works together. We will make multimedia works together. Some of it involve interactive technology and stuff like that. And in those works, in those early works, I played the role of the composer in the group, sort of just making music, although these are works that have visual elements and video and text in them. And so when I went to the US, I lost the physical proximity to these collaborators in my artist collective, and I started branching out and started, I guess, in a way, taking up some of the things that they would do in the artist collective and learning to make those things uh, myself. That was what I get started this whole branching out. Um, so I want to start with a work that I made in 2000 and I want to say 2014, could have been 15 actually, called Nocturne. So this was actually in 2015. So Nocturne was the beginning of a phase that went on for about 2 years when I was really interested in the relationship between sound and warfare and military conflict. More specifically, how sound and music have been used historically as a weapon in actual warfares. Um, Examples of sound as a weapon in mythologies, in biblical writings, but also the use of sound as a weapon uh, in uh, in modern times. So actually, let me start by sharing my screen with you now, so you can see some images. So this is Nocturne, and it was made in 2015. And the idea for the work is really quite simple. In this work, which is both a sound installation and a performance, there's a setting, an installation setting of a kind of a sound stage. And the sound stage is filled with sort of everyday objects. So there's compressed air, wind chime, glass bottles, sand and tea leaves and rice. There's also a bass drum with air pistol on it, and electric shaver and the such. And so in this work, what I'm doing is that I'm watching, in the performance, I'm watching a video recording, not a video recording, but like a video, long video that I have added together using found footages of night bombing that I have downloaded from the internet. And I muted the sound in these videos and edited these footages together into a very long, it's actually a 6 hours loop. And while I'm watching this loop in real time, I am sort of recreating the sound of night bombing and the explosion sound with these household objects. So I'm basically doing Foley with the household objects. And this work is to be experienced on a radio. So in this photo, you see there's a member of the audience listening to the radio set. So he's tuned to an FM frequency that I pirated in the space. And so what was actually happening is that the sound that I was creating uh, at the sound stage is fed into the computer, and then it's brought. So this is, for example, this is the radio transmitter. All of that sound is fed into the computer and then into the radio transmitter, which is then broadcast on an FM radio frequency, which then the audience can listen to with a radio set that is provided um, at the venue. So I want to show you a little video of how what the performance sounded and looked like. Um, but I mean, bear in mind that whatever you're hearing through the radio, uh, that's not what you're hearing in the space itself, but it's actually the sound that will, like how it would sound like through the radio set. But we've edited that sound into the radio, into the video footage to create the illusion that you're listening through the radio. So let me go ahead and do that and um, do the share screen again so you can hear the audio. Um, so the in the in the video, I looked a little tired because this work is always performed as a durational performance. So for this particular version, which is the second time I've done it, and that was in New York, I I performed the piece every day for, well, every day that the gallery is open for 6 hours a day for a month and a half. So it's the durational aspect of the piece is very much part of it as well. Sort of kind of like the um, I guess there's a durational aspect to um, sort of in the military these days you would have humans sitting behind a computer operating drones, and they would there's an aspect to it that is durational, but there's an aspect to it that is very connected to um, just the everyday. Um, these officers who are operating drones, they would go into work for a couple of hours for a shift, and then they would go, they would leave, and they would go home and make dinner. And so this work belonged to, a phase when I was, yeah, very interested in sound and warfare, but also the there's a paradoxical quality um, in these sort of footages, in that they sound like, to me, when I first started researching the piece, these video sound, they almost sound like fireworks to me, and there's a seductive quality to them. And so, and I was, so I felt that, and I thought that, and then I immediately started feeling guilty about feeling um, or even perceiving a sort of aesthetic dimension to these very violent scenes. So Nocturne was trying to deal with that, and it's a part of a part of a series of work that was titled Pastoral Music. So another piece that was that's related, or that was a part of the series, is called Canon. Um, so Canon involves me performing, again, another durational performance with a long-range acoustic device, the LRAD, which is a sound weapon. So when I first did this piece in 2016, I was able to rent and even buy a unit of this just off the commercial market. But since then, many nations have outlawed the LRAD for civilian use, and rightly so, because the LRAD was designed as a weapon, and it is used as a weapon. So the LRAD looks like this, and this is the model that I used, but there are other models that are larger, but they all essentially do the same thing. It is a very loud speaker that is able to transmit sound in a directional manner over a long distance. And because of these very special properties, is used by law enforcement a lot as a way to disperse protesters. Uh, and so I was fascinated by this weapon and how it was being used. But when I was researching into the technology itself, I also was fascinated by another paradox that was in the history of this technology, which is that the technology of these very long-range broadcasts, commercially speaking, it's mostly widely used in airports and in nuclear plants as a way to disperse, to drive away pest birds. Because obviously these are places where you don't want birds to hang out. But the way they do it, the way they achieve this dispersion effect, is to use these long-range devices to play back calls of birds in distress. And so when birds hear distress calls, they take that as a signal for imminent danger, and therefore they leave the scene. And so so I was drawn to this um, uh, merging of opposite elements, these calls that to our ears are just bird songs, and there's almost, I mean, the quality of these songs are, of course, in contrast to the military origin of these LRAD devices. So in this work, what I do is that I'm standing behind the LRAD, and the audiences are always physically separated from me over a long distance. So in this case, it's one end of the hall to the other end of the hall. I've also staged a version where I'm on an elevator, a crane elevator lift in one end of the space, and the audiences are on the second level, also uh, over a very long distance. And I'm basically essentially performing bird calls um, in response to and improvising with pre-recorded bird call tracks that are being played back with these devices. Um, so those are, I guess, sort of two key works that anchored um, the phase when I was really interested in sound and military conflict. And then, so after that phase, which is around 2015-16, I started taking up topics that are a bit lighter, um, and started making works that are essentially sort of music theater. So going a little bit back to my musical, um, like my first love, music, and write composing music, and but creating an installation environment for it. So this is one example. This work was made in 2017. It's called Palazzo Gundane. Um, and this work has an interesting backstory. So those of you who are watching, I don't know if you are too young to remember or to know that there's a song titled "Do They Know It's Christmas," made by Band A, which is basically just a bunch of um, the most high-profile celebrities and singers at the time, who got together to make an album, a charity album, charity single, to raise funds for famine in Ethiopia. And so this is the album cover, "Do They Know It's Christmas?" And the song has, I mean, the song did quite well. It raised a lot of money, but it also, the lyrics has a certain lines of the lyrics has a problematic, um, very sort of slightly offensive imperialist overtone. And some people have picked it up since. And actually, when they remade the song more recently, they have since modified those two lines of lyrics. And so when I was researching the song, I came across a piece of, I read on a blog, a political blog that you can see here, that a bunch of musicians in Africa have created a response to Band Aid's "Do They Know It's Christmas?" and call that song "Yes We Do." And they use that song apparently to raise funds for educational programs in the UK. And this group of musicians from Cape Town was led by somebody uh, called Boomtown Gadani. So I was really fascinated by this story, and so I started asking my friends in Cape Town whether they could connect me to this musician. And uh, only then I found out that this person doesn't actually exist. Um, he was made up by a fake, or well, not fake news, but like a satire news website, kind of like an onion mix kind of fake news website um, that has since folded. So this piece of news went around the internet several times, and by the time Red Light Politics posted it, and by the time I picked it up, it had been reposted as something that had actually happened. So I was really fascinated by that idea, and I basically, in this work, I try to imagine that this person actually existed, and I made the song, and then I went and filmed the MTV of the song, and also created a whole installation environment in celebration of this fictional character called Buntam Gadani. So what you're seeing in these images is the music theater, which doubles as this character's living room, filled with his favorite things and his costume. There's also another room which is like a Hall of Fame type room with platinum records and memorabilia, and also this sculpture in the middle, which is supposed to be, in my imagination, the like kind of a trophy that um, he could have won by touring the record and uh, selling the record to platinum levels. Um, and the 3D mode and the sculpture is a 3D collage of many different elements. So again, let me share this screen with you and play you a little video walkthrough of this piece. I think I might be running out of time, so I'll try to be quick. Um,
Used to live underneath that burning sun. Do they know it's Christmas time?
So um, so that was a part of a larger show with 4 pieces in it, all of which looked at charity single. Um, and the show was titled Songs for Disaster Relief. I'm slightly going over time, actually really going over time, so I'm going to skip ahead and talk and go right to this last piece that I want to talk about, which so we talked about like the sound and warfare strand of thinking that was a little older, and the music theater phase, which I'm still in. I'm still doing those sort of making music theater and making musical composition that are sometimes performed as music theater, and then using the documentation and the footages from a recording of the performance. I then construct like an installation environment with it. There's another strand of my work that is much more about the philosophical aspects of sound and listening, which are usually my work has a like a very eclectic quality about it visually. Like there are many, I use very intense colors. There's a lot of very flashy, let's say bells and visual bells and whistles. With recently, I've also been doing animations, and they usually are very fast paced. But with this series of works, titled muted situation, they are a lot more introspective, and they are much more about sort of one conceptual idea. Um, so the entire muted situation series is kind of, it's actually really simple. Um, uh, Conceptually, imagine if you had a remote control and you could mute like one very specific layer of sound, but have the other layer of sound still be heard. And actually, they are heard precisely because you have muted a very specific layer, which is usually the foreground. Then that's what the muted situation tries to do. And this is um, uh, sort of like a conceptual approach, but I have written um, altogether 22 of these muted situations. Some of them are more, some of them are very detailed. It gives you actually exact instructions on how to achieve those muted situations. Like there's one that is a muted line dance. So specifically, I wanted to take away the percussion, but then everything else will still remain, and you cannot diminish the performative energy of the performance. And in the instruction, it talks about how you might achieve that, whilst others are more open-ended. And so muted situation number 22, which is something that I'll show as a sound installation in MUMA as well, is the conclusion to the series. So um, this muted situation is quite specific. It's muted Tchaikovsky's Fifth. And so the instruction is for an orchestra to perform Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony in its entirety from beginning to end without sort of diminishing the performative energy, but we should try as hard as possible to try to suppress the pitch layer of the music. But the rhythm, the timbre, the the performative elements such as ensembleship, all of those elements should still be retained. And so the process is like this. When we start working on a piece like this, I take the proposition to the ensemble, to the orchestra, and then together we figure out their definition of and their understanding of what it means to mute just the pitch, but let the timbre of the tone come through. So then, to give you an example, for the strings, what we did was that put we tried many different things, but we decided at the end to put a piece of glad wrap, uh, very thin piece of plastic on the string. So then when the bow is in contact with the string, you still get all the scratchiness, and you definitely still get the left hand finger sliding and the pressing down and all of that. But you just like the pitch becomes, it's still there, it's very faint, but it becomes certainly not the foreground element anymore. You have kind of shifted the relationship and sort of pushed it into the background. And we did the same for each of the instruments in the orchestra through a process of negotiation and discussion. And then at the end, we performed the piece um, in a studio. And I just want to say, for those of you who are not musicians, uh, that the sound in the video that you're gonna be hearing, there's no post-production involved. That's how it sounded in the space. It's not like I went in the studio and took away the sound. It's the idea of the muted situation is to try to to make those suppression and those reshuffling of layer in the physical performance itself. And then sometimes these physical performance they may not they may even fail to achieve the total suppression of that foreground layer. But that's a part, like that potential failure is also a part of the work itself. So here, let me share with you the recording um, of an excerpt of the recording. So this is the end of the performance, the very last couple of minutes of the fourth movement. Here, share, pure sound, share.
Cut.
So I have very quickly sort of gone through several works that belong to sort of different strands of thinking, and I think they look really different, but I think they I mean, I feel like I shouldn't apologize for the fact that they look very different. I mean, that's actually the very eclectic quality of my different bodies of output is something that I have made peace with already. But I hope that it have given you a taste of what I do and what I'm interested in. And when the worst of this is behind us, I also look forward to um, seeing you at the show at MUMA. Thank you.